Welcome to Wild Heart Revival, a gathering place for heartfelt conversations and stories as pathways of renewal and revival. I am your host, Tay Tayari, and today's guest is Oak Mountain. In this enriching discussion, we explore the power of presence in communication as a gateway to truth. Oak offers insights and practical strategies for cultivating deep, present moment awareness. He also eloquently illuminates how presence can transform our relationships, enhance intimacy, and resolve conflicts with empathy, understanding, and compassion. With a background in philosophy, Eastern traditions, and personal development, Oak is engaged with all that inspires his heart and mind. His unique hybrid techniques apply the blended wisdoms of East and West to one's mind, body, and spirit, so that your truth can rise above the confusion and take the driver's seat of your life. Through mindfulness, presence practices, and a touch of mysticism, he helps others transform their inner and outer worlds to realign with joy and find their smile for life. Oak is a best-selling author, transformational facilitator, and philosopher residing in Western Canada. If you're curious about the personalized threshold counseling that I offer for wanderers, wanderers, and edge walkers, or if you would like to explore other podcast episodes or my latest essays, simply visit coyotecouncil.earth. You'll find a direct link in the show notes. You are also invited to join our monthly Musings newsletter, where I share reflections alongside updates on new podcast episodes and other creative endeavors. You can easily subscribe on our website through the Connect page. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to our show on your preferred podcast platform. Your likes, comments, ratings, and shares are invaluable in supporting the organic growth of these heartfelt conversations and stories. Now, allow yourself to settle wherever you are. Invite your awareness into your body by fully attending to your felt sense experience of this present moment. This may mean deepening your breath and welcoming the animating force of life more wholesomely into your being. Attending to the sounds around you with openness and curiosity. Feeling the rich sensations of existing as a body held by gravity and in contact with the living world. And softening your gaze, if safe to do so, while expanding your heart space to be more receptive, less inhibited, more intuitive, creative, and discerning as you let this conversation enfold you. From this more open, spacious, receptive, and curious space, let's warmly welcome the wonderful Oak Mountain into our present moment awareness. And so my question to you is, how can we heighten our awareness of the nuances in both verbal and nonverbal communication to cultivate more meaningful connections? And what practices or philosophies have you adopted to consistently nurture such an environment?
Starting off strong.
Yeah, brother.
So presence is the portal to truth. And anything that is meaningful is predicated on a relationship to truth. And so when we're speaking about communication, we are talking about a relational practice. Okay, so to cultivate meaningful communication is to cultivate a greater concentration or presence of meaning in the verbal and nonverbal cues, right? So, okay, seems straightforward enough, but the question becomes, where are we finding this meaning? And what is it in relation to? So like if you and I are sitting here and having a conversation, I'm talking about talking, which kind of gets a little meta.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're looking for meaningful connection, or communication rather, we are probably in some sense looking for meaningful relating and meaningful connection. And this is connection to other or connection to sense of self or truth in some sense. So presence then connects into this by noting or by being the means by which we come into communion with what is true. And what is true is, in the language of Susan Campbell, the author of Getting Real, it's what is. So the cultivation of presence then is a practice of experiencing with an open willingness what is internally, primarily, and firstly, and then also externally, because it's the balance between, or the translation of, what's going on inside, what's being perceived from the outside, and then what's put into words that would be how we measure something that's meaningful or authentic versus maybe control based or distorted or based in projection. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I love the way you went with that. It reminds me actually of Byron Katie's work. Are you familiar with her? Yeah.
Some of it, yep.
Yeah, I've only read one book by her, and it was some months ago, and it was called Loving What Is. And she outlines this framework that she uses with her clients. And it's, I think, primarily like 4 questions to ask yourself at any given time in a moment of reflection. But this, of course, this can work in communication with others. And the first question is it true? And you answer that, and then you ask the second question, can you absolutely know that it is true? And then it goes on to talk about how do you react when you think that thought, whether it's true or not, and so on. But I love the idea of loving what is, like to take it further, to be with what is, and then to connect that to the heart, to not only be with what is and to seek the truth, the emergent truth in the moment, but then to extend your heart to it and to even welcome it into some kind of loving embrace. What comes up for you when I share that?
I'm reminded of a piece from a conversation I had yesterday at an event here in Calgary where someone asked me, I had described this open willingness to be with what is. And the person I was speaking with said to me, that sounds like pacifism. Like, oh yeah, just let it be, man. Whatever works, anybody can do what they want. And I was like, let's be really clear that we don't conflate acceptance with condoning. And that's an appropriate and a very important distinction, is that there are some things that we ought to look at in terms of distinguishing, am I condoning this through my action? Am I promoting or allowing to propagate this particular vibration or behavior, say in a relationship dynamic? That I can, and this might be surprising to some to hear, I can recognize and be in a no, we could say a no for a particular action, but still be in a love space and still have an open heart. And that's a very interesting balance to strike. And I think that's a layer I would add on to what you're saying, is like, yes, the first step is recognizing the difference between what we think, what we believe, what we expect or want versus what actually is. Learning to distinguish those two, that we could say is the difference between maybe story writing or thinking and perceiving. And then when we have a practice such that our perceptive openness, or open perception, we might say is a better term, is spacious enough, then we can introduce the extension of compassionate love, which, it all starts internally, right? There's this, everybody says, start with yourself, start with yourself. But in actuality, you can imagine that if I am harboring rejections and judgments about my own being, my own history, how it should be, should have been, wish it weren't, or what have you, if those are occupying the same position that truth should be occupying, the truth's rightful position, then all of my interpretive mechanisms are going to be shaped and distorted based on the color and character of those beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And that precludes me from not only genuinely experiencing what is, but also taking that step into love for myself or for the person that I'm interacting with.
Yeah. Yeah, I just interviewed this wonderful woman. Her name's Katie Gray. And something that she shared in the conversation that really struck me, so simple, but she really emphasized to stay close to oneself. When things feel difficult and challenging and confusing, frustrating, confronting, to stay close with oneself. That's so important. And you reminded me of that because I'm thinking, like, back to the original question, how to really attend to the orientation of intentionally deepening our presence in communication, that of course we have to stay close to ourselves. And when we're judging ourselves, whether it's conscious or unconscious, or if we don't trust ourselves, so on and so forth, whenever we're in those modes of thinking or storing about ourselves, that's a way of actually separating from or stepping away from or floating away from ourselves. Because when we stay close to the moment, we recognize that those judgments are from the past, and that any stories that we're carrying with us into the now aren't necessarily about the now. And so when we're caught up in that, it is really it isn't this commitment to just staying close. And so I'm wondering how you stay close with yourself. In that initial question I asked, like, what are some practices or philosophies? And you definitely shared a philosophical lens. But I'm curious, like, what are some things that you are consistently implementing into your days and your communication that allow you to stay close with yourself and then so with another?
Being extremely parsimonious with what I identify with, or what I allow to be a part of the identity. So, when you say staying close to self, you have to be really clear on what the heck you're talking about. Because if you're talking about your self-conception, who you believe you are and your history, staying close to that is actually going to do more harm than good.
Mm-hmm.
Because those are the pieces that are likely harboring distortion. And so for myself to, in my own experience, stay close to what I would understand to be self is to know that the most justifiable identity or identity qualifier would be nothing more than I am. This is to say, being and awareness, 2/3 of Satchitananda.
Mm.
And insofar as it relates to connecting to others, when we have this parsimonious and very much distilled down sense of what is truly self, nothing more than present moment existence and awareness, all of those other pieces that would serve to block meaningful relating are held up in contrast. They only block meaningful relating when we have identified with them, truly.
Mm.
It's like if I said to you, 30 purple elephants bought a unicycle, that has nothing to do with your sense of self, sense of being, or mine, or our relationship, or anything that we've been through in our years of friendship. So
Mm.
there's no connection to it. But if I form a sentence that maybe could be interpreted or as a literal judgment about you, or a judgment about myself, or what have you, because it has enough hooks and your self-conception has the reciprocal Velcro, well, now it can latch on to something. And this is where we get the cascade of emotionality, of triggers and buttons and things like this. So we almost, not that we're going to get rid of our buttons entirely, lest we pursue a monastic lifestyle, but we can minimize those branches that would reach out into the wind and catch all the ways that we block ourselves from being loved and loving. So that's something that I do for myself is this really what I am? No.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I love that you um, really drew attention to distinguishing what is self. How do we identify with ourselves? How do we know ourselves? That's super important. I guess I was immediately thinking more, kind of more like somatically, you know, that
Well, it is.
it,
There's really no difference to that, because when you recognize that the truest aspect of your being is present moment awareness,
mhm,
then you found the ground. And it's from that seat that we can start to, I don't want to say qualify, but let's say investigate or become familiar with the different realms of conscious contents and sensations.
mhm,
And it really has to start from this seat, because if we don't have our right seat, then we run the risk of, oh, well, this bodily sensation becomes a graft of identity. Oh, this particular memory becomes a graft of identity. Oh, this, and it just goes and goes and goes and goes. And when we've found this seat and we're rooted in this place, it actually transforms the way we use language. It's transformed the way I use language, and it transforms the way my clients use language, because it no longer is ego-centered, but it's perception-centered. It's awareness-centered. It's present moment experiencing the what is centered.
mm,
I can say, I'm noticing, I'm perceiving, I'm imagining, I'm witnessing, I'm sensing, I'm feeling. Okay, these are all things that are passing through consciousness. They're contents of consciousness, right? Great. That's different than I am, or you made me, or all these different types of things, right? We've really kept it down so that the language we use when it's predicated on this simplified self is more in connection to what is true. Because what's true is that you're experiencing the feeling of sadness, grief, joy, pleasure, what have you. You're witnessing the thoughts passing through the mental sense, whatever they are.
mm,
That is closer to the truth than I am thinking. It's like
mm,
I'm like thoughts are being witnessed would almost be the most true. And that helps to soften, we might say, soften and open the parts of our bodies and the parts of our minds that do clam up and close up in self-protection, because what is being protected but whatever is perceived to be self.
mm, mhm. Yeah, I'm reminded of there's this beautiful book by Jack Cornfield. It's called A Path with Heart. And there's a section in there where he's talking about um, how important it is to, I think he's speaking kind of directly to meditation practice, but of course that extends into life. Um, and he says to take the one seat. And it's this idea that in your practice or in life, in any given moment, to remember that there's just you're just here. That to take the one seat means to have the courage and to take up the responsibility of simply being here now, of opening yourself to the presence of being that's here. That when the stories and the thoughts and the things arise and they want to take you on a ride, that you have that courage and that responsiveness and that witness, the awareness to go, actually, I'm here right now. Like, yes, that's there, that stream of thoughts and stories and whatever, that's there for sure. But I'm here. I can sit here and I can see it all for what it is. And it reminds me, I did a Vipassana retreat in Cambodia years ago, and it's 10 days of like 10 hours of meditation a day. And it's very simple, but very profound. And one of the things that I noticed after some days of this practice is that it's almost like I could listen, which listening and feeling, they really melded after a few days. I don't know how to explain it other than that, but it felt like all the pores of my body and like all the cells of my body were listening and feeling the moment. That when I heard a sound, like right now I can hear rain, and because I'm very cerebral right now, but I'm trying to attend to my body, it just, I can like it, there's rain happening, and it's like in here, you know. But after some days of this practice, I would hear sounds and they would resonate in all sorts of strange parts of my body, and they felt meaningful. It was very interesting. And so this is something that I try to remember in my work with clients and in this conversation and in any moment that I can remember, as to how can I open my awareness and the pores of my being? How can I connect the cells of my being to be attuned to what's happening here now? That it's not just my ears and my thinking mind that's taking in the information, but that my cells are taking it in and metabolizing it, and that there's some kind of importance to that. And that was some advice that I got one time from a psychotherapist, was to, when you're attending to your client, make sure that you're listening with your entire body and being. Yeah. If something comes up for you there, please go for it. But I have a
Mhm.
question in a different direction, but I want to offer you that space first.
Life we tend to think about as constituted by species or morphology. You know, a cat's a cat because it looks like a cat. It's not a monkey because it's different, right? But in actuality, biological life, the smallest unit that comprises biological life is the cell. And there's lives lived inside of that cellular awareness.
Mm,
And all activities of the cell are communicative and participatory.
yes.
And we can bring that upscale, just like you're saying. And Vipassana is a really beautiful example of this, is because, you know, sometimes I've found that, and myself included in this, people are attracted to the Buddhist philosophy because of its mind clearing nature. It is logical, internally coherent, it makes sense, right? And the idea of alleviating suffering is probably an attractive one. And yet, for anyone who's sat in Vipassana, it is not a philosophical endeavor. It is entirely a somatic experience of
Mhm.
being with the body in the present moment. And that surprises some people. But in actuality, we can imagine, and this is a quote from Stephen Harold Buhner, that the mind is not just embrained, but it's embodied. That is
Yeah.
to say, our perceptual awareness is not only and exclusively localized to our eyes and ears, we might say, or our sense of mind. And so what does it mean to hear with your feet? What does
Mm,
it mean to see with your skin, right?
mm,
There's we start to get maybe a bit metaphorical or poetic in this, but there is a genuine area of conscious investigation present when we are willing to blur the distinctions between senses. And that takes me to the idea and the experience of synesthesia.
I was just
And this
thinking
is quite
that. Yeah.
an interesting one. So when you were describing, Tay, the feeling the rain, feeling the sound of the rain, something that I've discovered about myself through my own journey with neurodivergence and low doses of psychedelics is that even in my sober state, I feel sound
Mm,
in a very real and tactile way. That's the blending that I get, is that it is a tacit and tactile experience to hear. And So I've known this intimately, and it's something that's very difficult to explain to people, that the sounds that are made or that arise have shape, texture, color, intensity, depth, almost flavor to them as they interact with the nervous system. And this is, I would wager, true for all of our senses.
Yeah.
That touch has a visual quality to it, that sight has an auditory quality to it. You can do this with kids too and say, like, okay, what sound is the color green? And they're like, oh, they'll come up with all sorts of stuff. And it's the way that we're interpreting this vibrational phenomenon that we call light or call sound. And so when you're speaking about it in a communication context, we also are now touching on, if we accept that the senses can be blurred to some degree, that there are perceptible, there is, let me put it this way, there is perceptible information available to us that is not perfectly quantifiable inside the box of any given sense, especially between people, especially between people who have an intimate relationship.
Mm.
It's like if you've ever been really close to somebody and you've shared dreams with them, or there's a level of telepathy, or they're at a distance and you know something's wrong because you can feel it. Mothers have this all the time. This is the mother's sense, right? Child's in danger. They're like, something's going on. The phone rings. It's like, yeah, mom, I'm having a bad day, right? This is non-local information transfer picked up by the cells and interpreted by the cells. And so, okay, you talked about verbal and nonverbal communication. On the verbal side, the beliefs and thoughts and preconstructions that we spoke to, that gums up the space between people. It gums up the space between minds, but it also gums up the space between hearts. How it does that is it actually occupies space in the nervous system that could be in an open and sensing state. So it's like if I put headphones in and I blast, Jacob Collier Volume 2, one of my favorite albums in the whole world, and then you're talking to me, well, I can't pick up on that. I'm not going to be able to attune to the emotional subtlety, to the nature of what you're saying, the story, maybe the meaning behind it, because my sense perception is occupied by other stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
And what people may not realize is that we occupy our own perceptive capacity, rather, by thinking and believing things beyond what is actually present in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that synesthesia is like a normative experience for folks that are non-civilized. In other words, the less tame you are, the more synesthetic, if that's a word, you will be. I think of accounts that I've heard of indigenous folks in the Amazon and how attuned they are to their environment, that they can sense wild things like animals in far distances, or communicate with each other over far distances by means that are not understandable by our civilized Western minds and bodies, our colonized minds and bodies, that they do things that we would say are impossible. And that part of that is the blending of all of their senses into this one tuned instrument of meaning making and creative capacity. And I mean, right now, as I say that, I'm feeling a bit of grief around that, to be honest. Like, I think about how our colonized bodies and minds have been really blunted in many ways. And it makes me think about how difficult that must make it for us to communicate at deeper levels with each other, that could be possible if we haven't experienced the last hundreds of years of colonization that we have. And it makes me wonder, like, what what are some ways that we might be able to awaken those sensuous sensibilities? I don't know if you've thought about this so much, but I'm curious if things come up for you now. Like, of course, a meditative practice would be helpful for this, but I'm thinking too, like you brought up Stephen Herod Buhner. He's been a great teacher of mine, and one practice that he offers that I've incorporated amongst many is that when you're walking out in some kind of wild space, to have the practice of looking up and widening your vision and allowing yourself to walk without looking at the ground, without looking at where you're going or what you're doing, but just to widen your vision as much as possible and to slow down and to feel how the terrain is moving you in a way. And that feels like, as an example, like a practice to really awaken those sensuous sensibilities and capacities. So what comes up for you in that way?
Of course, there's two avenues, one being by oneself and the other being in relation.
Mm,
And there's a lot of crossover. A meditative walk that you've described is very powerful. Insofar as the vision piece is concerned, I'd love to broaden that out to the other five senses as
mm,
well. It's like just yesterday, I was doing almost exactly what you're describing.
mm,
I do
mm,
that pretty much every night and just reorient for the slumber time. And I heard crows. They were up at the top of the tree about every night. 9:45 to 10 o'clock ish is when they land in these same trees, and they squawk loudly for 30 to 40 minutes. And last night I just stopped and listened and watched. And one of the balancing features is that if you're going to do a meditation like this, or you're going to explore sense sensitivity and presence in sense sensitivity, say that 10 times fast, is learning to, I want to say, soothe the mind enough that it can take a back seat, right?
mm,
It's like, let meaning making be at the bottom of the list of the things that you're attending to. Because I could sit there and say, oh, the crows, they're noisy buggers, aren't they? Or I wonder what they're doing. Or,
mhm,
oh, they're probably doing this, right? I could conjure and I could manufacture meaning. Or instead, what I chose to do was to listen and to watch and allow life, allow what is, allow that present moment to, I don't want to say dictate, but to reveal, to demonstrate its living purpose to me in the relationship between that which is and that which is witnessed, or the witnessing. In relationship, one can do this as well by creating space to engage either in one of the senses exclusively or all of them, right? What is it like? This reminds me of an exercise hosted, first introduced by Dolphin Casper in one of his transformational workshops. I did an interview with him on my podcast as well, someone I deeply admire and love very much. And a part of this workshop was, it took place in pairs, and we were set up to occupy two different roles. One is the witness, and the other is the witnessed, the one being witnessed. And we were welcomed as the one being witnessed to embody a number of whatever arose. So there was a prompt, what's an emotion that has been alive for you that wants to come to the surface, that's yearning to be known, right? And embody this without words, with the full permission and knowing that you can show and are invited to show all of this in this space, whatever it is. And as the witness, it's the reciprocal role. We step into this openness and this, rather than expressive, it's perceptive, this
mm,
receptivity of what is, holding, if it's courage or beauty or joy or grief or whatever that's happening in front of us. And we're being encouraged, just like you mentioned, Tay, earlier, to receive that with our whole being. What does
mm,
that feel like, from the tips of my toes to the top of my head, to witness somebody sobbing, heaving with grief, right?
mm,
What does that feel like?
mm,
And allow that to be moved through me, allow myself to be moved. And I want to circle back in relationship to this, because there was a piece that I think is really important to introduce, and that's the distinction, or at least the clarification for what focus means and its role with presence. Because where our focus is a concentrated awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where our focus rests, be that on an object or a sensation or on awareness itself, will determine the depth and capacity of our sense perception and our openness to be able to relate to what is. And so recognizing that the focus is under the domain of the will is a really powerful thing to realize. Is that we cannot change what we are aware of necessarily. I can't change the color of these lights or immediately with my mind change the color of the camera in front of me, but I can choose where I place my focus and how I relate to them. And so there's this interplay when we're working to develop present moment awareness. I like to say this, the mechanism of mindfulness, which is present moment awareness, the mechanism of mindfulness is the willful redirection of presence to the current moment.
Mm.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
So we bring it in. And so to cultivate that is to do the same thing in relationship. We can do practices and say, what do I notice? Well, I notice, that you're moving your lips right now, Tay, and I wonder, maybe I imagine that you might have eaten something hot and maybe you've got a burn inside your lip that you're chewing on, right? Okay, so that's an imagining. Now we've separated that out and we can exist in this reality where what is true, and we also can be with this perceptive truth. And what really this drives us towards, and I think this is the heart of authentic and sustainable relating, is a shared reality, occupying a shared reality in a meaningful way. So that was a lot there, but I'll pass it back.
Yeah, I mean, that was all really great. Thank you. I'm wondering, how might you invite someone into that redirection of momentary awareness? How might you invite someone into focus? Like, let's say you're having a conversation with someone and you can sense that the focus really isn't there, that it's causing some kind of confusion, or it's causing um, that it's just there really isn't clarity and the connective capacity that might be available just isn't really there or online. How do you invite someone into that?
It's context dependent. If it's a client I'm working with, that'll be one thing. If it's a friend, it's another. I do have clients whose focus is disparate and scattered,
Mm,
and I bring them to the one thing that is constantly in communion with the present moment, which is their body.
mhm,
It's like, tell me what you can feel right now.
mhm,
3 sensations that you can be aware of. And let's go slow. Take a couple breaths with each of them, right? Okay, I feel sort of a cool breeze on my ankle. I feel the chair beneath me and the smoothness of the pen in my fingers.
mhm,
Okay. Well, now we're tuned in. We're a little bit closer to the present moment, right? So that's a really effective way. And particularly if they're speaking about something, or if we're having a conversation about something that has an emotional charge to it, then I would say, okay, now let's reintroduce that last sentence. I really hate that guy at work. Okay, so say that out loud and then do the same thing. Tell me what you feel. 3 sensations in your body that are different from the ones you just said. Oh, well, I notice there's sort of like a pit in my stomach, and I feel tense, and I feel this like really grating weight in my heart. Okay,
mhm,
can we be with that and invite them into just that same willingness we've been speaking about? Can this moment and the contents of your awareness be okay to experience? Can we say yes to that? Like
mhm,
the motto for my company is, a smile is saying yes to life, because we ultimately have the opportunity to either say yes or say no. And when we say no to the present moment, this is where we get closing off, we get trauma, we get repression, suffering, and all of these other things, because life wants to move, right? The second piece I'll speak to is how I've invited friends into this. And it's more of a relational piece, and it comes with a little bit more vulnerability. So as an example, a couple weeks back, I went and visited a friend of mine, and he's struggling at the moment with his own demons and things he's going through. And as a result, well, we might say that the demons that he has kept as bedmates have been invited in on the coattails of an unwillingness to be with what is in the present moment. And therefore, this manifests symptomatically as scattered focus or constantly looking at the next thing and going for different types of stimulus. And it hurt. Okay, I'll tell you this. I felt a great pain and a great grief because the depth of the friendship I've cultivated with this man has come through presence. It's come through a dedication to being with one another when we are engaging. And I just wasn't getting any of that. It was barely any eye contact for an hour and a half. This was happening. Phones were going off. Texting was going on. And I just said, I'm feeling really sad right now because I yearn to relate with you in presence. And I've been reaching for that and yearning for that. And what I'm noticing is that I can't seem to maintain eye contact with you for too long. I've noticed that you've picked your phone up several times while I've been speaking, that you've spoken over me and changed the subject. And this all is contributing to a great lack of connection a sense of a lack of connection for me in this moment. And that is enough to invite someone into the present moment, because what you're doing is what I did. And if you do this, something similar, is that you're inviting them into your present moment awareness. This is here and real for me. Boom, now they're here with it. They don't get to say, well, that's in the past or that's in the future, or that it's like, no, I am feeling this here and now. And so there's two ways. We can invite them into their own awareness, or we can invite them into our experience as a means of bringing presence.
Yeah, and of course, by inviting them into your momentary experience, that it's in the field of experience and awareness with them in that moment. So they are automatically invited into some kind of reflection point with their own experience as it relates to you in that moment. Yeah, it's amazing how often people don't risk that kind of vulnerability. Maybe there's probably many reasons why someone might not take that kind of risk. But I think that one of the reasons might be like a fear that by sharing something like that, that the person would then take that as some kind of hurtful share, that they might take it too personal or something, whatever that means, that they might think that you are judging them, or even like attacking them for their lack of presence or their lack of showing up in the way that you hoped for or that you wanted. And so what would you say to someone who expresses that they have that kind of fear, that if they were to be that vulnerable and to speak in that way with a loved one, someone that's close to them, that their loved one would then respond in that way? How would you encourage them to meet that experience with courage?
I would tackle it with 2 points. The first being that belief that something bad will happen is a learned belief picked up somewhere in your experiential history, and therefore is not the determining truth of all relation, but it's something that's arising in you, right? As such, if you're willing to feel the emotion that arises when that belief comes up, you actually gain a greater deal of power and capacity to move with it than if you were to only go, oh, it's true, and holy crap, I'm getting the heck away from that, So recognizing that it is not necessarily true, it's real because you're feeling it, but it's not necessarily true. The willingness to feel what's arising when that belief comes up is going to be a big piece of it. And the other half of this, the second point would be actually maybe kind of a little bit of a tangent, which is to say, not everyone is ready, willing, or safe to be vulnerable with.
Mm-hmm.
And, even in my own experience, I have, and I'm sure other people do as well, ample experience of being vulnerable and transparent and being met with hostility or being met with reactivity, being
Mm-hmm.
met with criticism and judgment and all of these types of things. And on the one hand, you're not obligated to be present with anybody else's violence or reactivity. But if you want to try, you can test out that experience by applying the same principle. Can I be with what is here? Right? We're not going to take their words as true. Maybe they're criticizing, maybe they're projecting, maybe they have no accountability in their language and they're playing out a childhood pattern because they were abandoned by one of their parents, what have you. They're hurting. Okay. Can you be with that? Can you be with them in that? Can you be with yours and them? And this is like levels of maturation and application, right? But those are the extremes, right? The extreme is we listen entirely to the belief and we never go and say anything authentic or vulnerable, or we do with the wrong people and that fear becomes validated, right? The other side of it is that most people really want to be real. They genuinely want to be real. They're yearning to know and to be known.
Mm-hmm.
And that when you are willing to take that risk to step forward and be like, hey, you and I have had conversations like that before where either of us have been authentically vulnerable about something that's alive or something that's happened. And just like you mentioned before with the last story, it invites the other person into an opportunity. It presents them with an opportunity and invites them into the moment to choose their own vulnerability and to be with it. And it's clunky and it's not necessarily the most refined at first, but that's okay because the intention is to find that shared reality. So I would say, one, be sure you're around people who have that willingness to grow and change. And two, the only way you will live free from that belief that limits you from your authenticity is to test out the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And it seems important to enfold some kind of vulnerable share like that in with some kind of empathetic resonance and certainly some kind of compassionate care, to ensure that, like when you gave the example with your friend that happened recently, you were very empathetic and definitely compassionate in the way that you shared that, but you could have done it another way of saying something like, hey, look, I'm really not feeling this because I feel like you're not present and I'm uncomfortable and I kind of feel like going. So what do you want to do about this? You know, and so there's layers to the effectiveness in our vulnerable shares that there's greater depths that can be touched by actively incorporating empathy and compassion into the way in which we choose to be vulnerable with our shares and our experiences.
And accountability. I think
Mm,
that's the key piece, is that if we put up your example and my example side by side, or what I actually said side by side, what you finished with is, what do you want to do about it?
mhm,
Well, in actuality, my experience of grief and sadness for not receiving or being presenced with in the way that would be nourishing, that's mine. That's
mm,
my responsibility. My dysregulation is my responsibility. Sure, my friends can be more attentive or less distracted, but ultimately, how I feel is my own to attend to. And praise be to the Most High when other people are willing to co-regulate and investigate that reconciliation together. That's a great gift, but it is not anyone's responsibility other than your own to attend to that. And I think that that's the difference that really opens up the receptivity from the other. It's compassion to self, it's also compassion for the other. And it's a level of accountability that says, look, I am sharing with you what is real without the expectation that you do anything about it other than just listen.
mhm,
Full stop. I don't need you to fix it. It's not a problem. we can investigate together, perhaps, how we might shift this dynamic, shift our behaviors, and change our behaviors moving forward in a way that would uplift both of our hearts. Great. Yes, please. Sign me up. Love that. But to hold that as an expectation is to, in some sense, hold the other both hostage and accountable for our own regulation. And if you expect others to regulate for or with you, if you expect that, you're going to be sorely disappointed, and it's going to really devastate the quality of your relationships, because now not only is the other person responsible for their own regulation, but you're making them responsible for yours. And that is a death blow to intimacy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it can lead to real misunderstandings and unnecessary conflicts. Let's go there. I'm very curious, like misunderstandings in communication often stem from, as you're saying, expectations, hidden biases, assumptions. And so how would you suggest that we identify and then integrate or overcome these sometimes elusive or invisible obstacles in order to transform confusion into clarity, opposition into opportunity, and ultimately deepen our relationships?
Here's a great rule, and it comes from Carl Rogers' works. If you're in a conversation with someone and maybe there's conflict, or it's a touchy conversation, there's vulnerability, there's emotions present, here's the rule. You don't get to reply to the other person about what they've said until you've provided them a reflective statement on what it is that they said and got confirmation from them that you've understood. That's it. So you don't get to offer your piece until you have confirmed that your understanding of what the other person has said is accurate and satisfying to them. You start there. How do you even have a misunderstanding? Because you've given two gifts. You've given the gift that you've demonstrated your understanding and your willingness to be informed by them. That's huge. If I say to you, I just want to make sure I really understand, even if we're fighting, we're having like a full-blown conflict. Whoa. I need to understand what's going on. Can you clarify that I understand what you just said? Everybody, no matter how mad they are at you, is going to be enthusiastic, even if it's just to correct you or catch you in being wrong. They're going to be enthusiastically engaged to want to speak to that. In most cases, in intimate relationships, that's your bridge. Because, Thich Nhat Hanh said that understanding is another word for love. So it's like, do I understand you? Can you help me understand you? It's to say, I'm trying to love you right now. And before I speak, I want to make sure that you're in that space too. That's a really key piece.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've worked with some couples in my counsel work, and of course, conflict is oftentimes why couples seek counsel. And one of the key things that I'm consistently reminding them to remember and to carry with them at all times, of course, but especially when conflict arises, is remember why you're here. Why are you here together in this moment? What got you here? And the most obvious answer is love. We love each other. That's why we've committed to this incredibly challenging opportunity to develop and deepen into partnership, is because there's love here. Remember that. Remember your hearts. Because oftentimes, and I'm included in this in my own ways at certain times, that when there's a conflict that arises, that will just be out the window. It's not even present, right? Because I need to be right about something, or I need to whatever, fill in the blank. There's so many reasons that come flooding in when my nervous system is heightened, or I feel unsafe, or I feel whatever. But if I can remember, why am I here again? Oh yeah, I'm here for love. Okay. It just allows me to soften into the moment. Whatever hard edge I was holding because of whatever reasons, it just automatically is blunted and softened and even can melt away. Even last night with my lover, we weren't having a conflict, but it was just like a momentary misunderstanding, and really actually just like a slight triggering of old childhood shit. And I noticed that part of me that, like you were saying, don't respond until you reflect back and make sure that you understand what they are saying and that they've confirmed that. I noticed the part of me that she's saying something and I jump in, I'm like, but this, but no, it's this way, that way. And wow, okay, whoa. And I had to remind myself, why am I here again? Am I here to be right about something? Or am I here to love this woman deeper and deeper every moment and every day of my life? Yes. And you know, the way that that manifested last night, initially, right off the start of that remembrance, was to just be quiet, soften. That's the practice right now, soften. Um, so yeah, remembering the heart. Something else that I remind clients too, and I'd love to chat with this about you now, is to seek the truth. Again, not to be right, not to win anything, that this isn't a contest or a competition, but to seek the truth collaboratively. What is it that actually is happening here? And so how do you see that, and how do you incorporate that into your own life and also into the work that you do with clients?
I like to take a core principle from improv comedy and apply it to my relationships and to my work with clients, which is yes and. Yes and.
Hmm.
Right? It's like you can't create a meaningful skit or a meaningful bit if you're going, well, no, it's got to be this. No, it's got to be that, right?
Mhm.
The no-nos are all from a place of control, which essentially is protection. Being right is also ourselves because we have valued what it means to be right in such a way that it elevates us and separates us from pain. It's like, oh, I'm right, so like whatever, I don't need to feel this, I've already won. So this idea of yes and is like, hey, what you said just now really hurt me, and I'm noticing these thoughts that maybe you think I'm stupid and that you don't want to have this conversation with me. It's like, I'm not saying yes to the belief, but I'm saying yes to its presence. Okay, that
Mm.
confirmed and affirmed. I hear X, Y, and Z. And so we have a couple options. I can immediately respond with my own, or the other piece that I was going to introduce, the yes and curious humility. Yes and curious humility. So there's affirmation and then a recognition that if I just go with what my mind conjures, sorry to tell you, listener, you're probably going to be wrong.
Mm.
Just like don't even try, because the other human before you has so much of a deeper and broader access to their lived reality that there's no friggin' way that you on the outside making these evaluative judgments is going to accurately hit the mark for what is true for them. You might get close, and good on you, and keep working at that, but allowing them through your curious humility to inform, to feed in, to impress upon you, to allow yourself to be impressed upon that truth. That allows for the holding of opposites sometimes. It's like, oh wow, my intention was actually to end the conversation quickly because I know that we're in a rush and that you really wanted to go see this movie, and that if I really started talking about this topic, Lord knows we'd be here for 45 minutes. So I was quite abrupt in my thing because I wanted to prioritize going out. But at the same time, yes, and you felt this way because of it.
Mm.
Okay, both of these, yes, and, right? Our truths do not need to be mutually exclusive. Let me say that again for the people in the back. Our truths don't need to be mutually exclusive.
Mhm.
When they're mutually exclusive, that's the ground for conflict. Man, I feel myself. I feel this pain in my body when I talk about it, Tay. It's like, it's so heartbreaking
Mm.
to be in a situation where if you take this, and I've taken this road, and it's not a guarantee that when you take yes and you're going to be met with that same thing, but to reach out and say yes and to be met with a no but, it can be very devastating. But I double down, and I would encourage others to double down. Okay, the no but, it's a yes and to the no but. Okay, so I hear that you disagree with that and that doesn't suit. Right. So this is what arises for me. We're constantly in affirmation and connection to what is in that moment. And that really is the most powerful and, like, I want to say insurmountable. Like, it cannot be taken over by any degree of falsehood or projected belief. If we're really tuned into what's going on inside of ourselves and genuinely open and invested in what's going on inside of somebody else, like, we're tuned into the source of life. There's nothing more powerful than that. It clears pain. It
Mm.
resolves conflict. It harmonizes hearts, even if there's pain. So that's what I would offer to that.
Hmm. Oh man, I read this book by Stephen Jenkins. I've mentioned it in so many conversations now. People might get sick of it, but go read the book. It's great. It's called Come of Age. And he 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 focuses a lot on language in that book and the roots of language. And there's a section where he's talking about truth. And he goes through the etymology of truth, and he relates it back to this sense of truing, that it's this, rather than being, like I said, seek the truth, he would probably challenge that in a way, by the way he explores it, and say something like, well, it's more like you're truing together in the moment, that you are collaborating and conjuring some kind of living dynamic truth in the moment, that it comes out of the togetherness. And I know that have talked, I mean, we've talked a lot about truth, and I know that this is important to you, and as it is to all of us, but it's something that you speak quite eloquently on. And so I'd like to just dive into that a little bit more with you. What does that bring up for you?
A vision of a planet orbiting a star, and that we can imagine that our orientation towards that light is the act of truing, right? And if we are oriented away from it, we live in shadow. We live in this sort of despair or this facade of light, right? Only that which is reflected off other things can point us more clearly to the source of truth. And the truth is not a thing, right?
Mm,
It doesn't have a thingness. And so, can we seek something without thingness? It's a good question, right? But the reason I use orbiting is because there's relationship. An orbit is a relationship,
mm,
right? Where we're held in this space, be it by gravity or by necessity when it comes to truth and language, that when we're relating internally in terms of our own narratives and our own mental landscape, I picture it as this orientation. Can I be in such a way that as I'm orbiting, I'm facing that truth? I'm basking in the light of the trueness of the moment.
mm,
And there's capital T truth, which, we can talk about that, and it really is the domain where language tends to fall short. And then there's truthfulness, right? There's a relationship to truth. I don't want to say degrees of truth, because that starts to imply that anybody can make up their own truth and everybody's truth is equal. Well, that's a crock of crap. It's not. Not all statements, not all propositions are equally true. And it's the relationship, like we would find in David Abram, the book Spell and Sensuous, that the trueness of language is in its relationship to what is alive, the more than human world, the
mm,
instantiated being in nature. And that's what we're orienting towards. And so as an action, I love that. I love that it's a verb, because that's the idea of dialogos. That's the idea of this shared reasoning and this shared exploration of intimacy of mind, heart, and body. What is the really real? Where is it that our lights are shining most brightly? And can we bring those together in such a way that we are co-shining, that we exist in this mutual resonance? And, you know, beautiful metaphors aside, what that requires is a dedication to, like, I want to say, skepticism of one's own faculties, And I don't mean that in a demeaning way, right? I don't mean to say, well, oh, maybe I'm just a total oaf and I can't really think about this and I'm not smart enough. I don't mean like that. I mean recognizing that the thoughts that arise for you about the situations you find yourself in probably aren't the most true. They might be, but a willingness to recognize that we don't need to accept their inherent and infallible trueness just because they feel in our body to have a particular resonance. In fact, that when we don't, we're doing a greater job at truing,
Mm.
if that makes sense.
It does. I could like feel um like a constriction in my body and then an openness that going from the truth to truing, that there is this sense of like I had the image of some people in my life that I know, or they really think they know, they really think they know what the truth is in the moment. They'll get behind their opinion really, really strongly. And it causes me to feel constricted, even just like thinking about being in the presence of that kind of conversation with someone. But the sense of truing with someone, like I could feel my musculature relax. I could feel my veins open. I could feel my heart expanding. This expansive quality. Um,
I think that speaks to the dynamism that is inherent in nature.
yeah.
It's like if you go and you played a C chord on a piano where you are, and I played a C chord on the piano, we could say, well, it's true that they're both C's, but are they the same C? Because they're going to be inherently different because of their vibration, right? So it is approximate, but it's approximating. We can almost get into a Platonic conversation here around the perfect forms, right? That there's a pure essence of concept or idea or frequency, and then all of these instantiated pieces wrap themselves around or orbit that. And I think that actually does us a disservice if we imagine that the most true aspect of it is somehow outside of nature. I think that we can look at all of the relevant instantiations of a particular thing, love, dance, music, pain, grief, whatever it is, and find the most living and harmonious instantiation that's present. Gearing towards that, I think for me, is what I would say is truing. It's like, what is the most living and resonant expression of truth in this moment?
Mm, hmm. Well said, brother. Thank you for that. We're nearing the end of this conversation. Um, and I'm wondering if you would care to share what's what's something in your own lived experience as of late, in your communication with those in your life, that you have been challenged by, and that you're really learning from. What's current in your own challenges, and that you're focusing on, and really actively absorbing nutrient from.
Yeah, what I've been struggling with and what I've been working with has been kind of the recognition that there's nothing we can do. There's no degree of vulnerability or authenticity that I can display that will change anyone's willingness to engage authentically or vulnerably. And what I've been challenged by is recognizing that as I lean into this vulnerability and as I lean into this journey of authenticity, that it sets others off. It presses buttons. It makes people angry. It's frustrating and confusing. And if they're not willing to turn towards and to feel fully what's going on for them, that's only going to keep happening. And
Mm.
if they're not willing to do this, then the relationship that I yearn for, that is authentic and open and vulnerable and transparent and communing in that real space, is inaccessible. And so I've been encountering grief with that, and also working to dance with those energies gracefully. How can I hold space for someone who refuses to meet authentically and accountably in communication while still being fully myself, fully open, and tuning into love in that way? So that's been a real challenge, and I'm not sure that I've found the nourishment as of yet, as it's still quite real and quite quite alive. The pain still lives, but that's the lesson that I'm learning at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Thank you for sharing that, man. And thank you for being here today. This has really been wonderful. It's always such a pleasure to hang out with you, to chat with you, and it's a great gift to be able to share your unique knowledge and wisdom in this way. And before we totally end this, I wonder if there's anything you want to speak to, um, anything that feels important to share with the listeners, and to tag on to the end of that, if you will, some kind of give some kind of direction so that people can find you, seek you out in an easy way.
You bet. The power to find peace is within your own will, and how you relate to this present moment and your present experience is really the choice point that can take you into the relief that you're seeking or into a familiar suffering. And so I would say, understand that that power and that thing that you might think you need is here with you, and it will grow the more willing you are to be here with you. And if this conversation and these ideas have been encouraging or illuminating or provocative in any way, I can be found at thesmilinghuman.com. You can send me an email through the contact form there. You can also email me at oak@thesmilinghuman.com. I'd love to make new connections. I'm also on Instagram at thesmilinghuman. Messages there is great as well. I have a number of different programs ranging from meditation courses, mindfulness living, coaching, and communication courses as well. So whatever strikes your fancy, if you feel like I could be of service to you, it would be my honor and pleasure. And lastly, I'll say, Tay, thank you for the opportunity to be here and to share in a heart-centered and fulfilling conversation, as always.